I wouldn't be here today, talking to you at 86 years old, if I hadn't almost died at 58. That's the brutal truth. The doctor walked into my hospital room that cold December morning, clipboard in hand, and said words that still echo in my mind. Mr. Thompson, you've been living on borrowed time. What you do next will determine if you see next Christmas. His eyes held mine for what felt like forever. It's entirely up to you now. I remember the steady beep of monitors, the antiseptic, smell that never quite leaves your nostrils, and how the winter light cast long shadows across the sterile floor. My wife Martha sat beside me, her fingers interlaced with mine so tightly that I could feel her wedding ring pressing into my skin. Our children, Samantha, David, and little Emily, had just gone to the cafeteria. They didn't need to hear what came next. I'd spent decades running a successful law firm, built a beautiful home in Connecticut, and had managed to provide my family with everything they could ever need. Everything except a husband and father who would actually be around to enjoy it with them. The heart attack had come without warning during my morning jog. One moment I was planning my day's meetings, the next I was on the cold pavement, a stranger, performing CPR while someone called 911. 3 minutes more, they told me later, and we wouldn't be having this conversation. As I lay in that hospital bed, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of not truly living before I did. That's why I'm sharing this with you today. Not because I want your sympathy, but because I don't want you to wait for your own wake-up call. By the time it comes, it might be too late. The 5 biggest mistakes I see people make, mistakes I made myself, aren't just cutting years off your life. They're stealing the joy from whatever time you do have. And I'm here to tell you, at 86, with the perspective only decades can bring, that it doesn't have to be this way. The first devastating mistake I made was prioritizing work over meaningful connections. For 30 years, I thought success meant a bigger office, more prestigious clients, a higher salary. I'd leave the house before my children woke up and return after they were asleep. I'd check my watch during school plays and recitals, mentally calculating how quickly I could leave to prepare for the next day's meetings. I remember the day David, my son, won the state swimming championship. He was just 13, and I'd promised I'd be there. But a client needed me for an emergency consultation, at least. That's what I told myself was an emergency. When I finally arrived at the pool, everyone was gone except for the janitor mopping the deck. David had waited for 2 hours before Martha took him home. That night, I found his swimming medal on my pillow with a note. Thought you might want to see this since you missed it. The handwriting was shaky, like he'd been crying while writing it. What was I thinking? I asked myself later that night, staring at my reflection. The man looking back at me had gotten his priorities catastrophically wrong. Here's what I wish someone had told me. No one on their deathbed ever wished they'd spent more time at the office. I've held the hands of too many friends in their final moments to believe otherwise. They whisper about the conversations they wish they'd had, the relationships they let slip away, the love they didn't express when they had the chance. Take my friend William, brilliant investor, terrible father and husband, made millions but died alone in a palatial house in the Hamptons. His children didn't even attend his funeral. All that money bought him an empty mansion and a solitary end. What should you do instead? Schedule connection like it's your most important meeting, because it is. Put down your phone when someone's talking to you. Look into their eyes. Ask questions and actually listen to the answers. Call your mother, your father, your siblings. Tell your children stories about your life. Ask about theirs. Touch the people you love, a hand on the shoulder, a hug that lasts longer than usual. These moments aren't distractions from living, they are living. The second mistake that steals years from your life is ignoring the whispers of your body until they become screams. I did this for decades, and I paid a devastating price. I was 45 when I started feeling unusual fatigue. Nothing dramatic, just needing an extra cup of coffee to get through the afternoon. My back hurt more than it should. Sleep became elusive. I had frequent headaches, but I was building a legacy, or so I thought. I didn't have time to be sick. I'll handle it after we win the Anderson case, I told Martha when she suggested I see a doctor. It's just stress. I said when my hands began trembling slightly during important presentations. By the time I finally collapsed in the courtroom, during closing arguments of the biggest case of my career, the damage was done. My body had been sending warning signals for years, and I dismissed every one of them. The diagnosis came fast and hard: severe hypertension, pre-diabetic, and early signs of heart disease. The doctor, Dr. Rachel Miller, I still remember. Her name, looked at me with a mixture of clinical detachment and personal disapproval. "Your body has been trying to talk to you for years, Mr. Thompson," she said, "and you've been hanging up the phone. That's the thing about our bodies. They're constantly communicating with us, but we've been conditioned to ignore the signals. That twinge, that unusual tiredness, that digestive issue that comes and goes. These aren't inconveniences to push through. They're messages we need to listen to." James, my college roommate, ignored persistent stomach pain for months. Too busy, he'd say. "I'll check it eventually." By the time eventually came, the cancer had spread beyond containment. He left behind 3 children and a wife who still struggles financially. All those hours he couldn't spare for a checkup, his family would give anything to have them back now. What I've learned is this: your body keeps a ledger, and eventually it collects on every debt. Regular checkups aren't a luxury or an inconvenience. They're a non-negotiable investment in your future. Those warning signs, they're gifts, not burdens. They're your body's way of whispering, "Pay attention now," before it has to scream, "Too late later." The third mistake, one that silently steals both quality and quantity of life, is nursing bitterness and resentment like they're precious possessions rather than poison. For 17 years, I didn't speak to my brother Robert. 17 years over a business disagreement that, looking back now, seems laughably insignificant. We had built a small side company together in our 30s, and when it came time to sell, we disagreed on terms. Words were said that couldn't be unsaid. Pride hardened into stubbornness, which calcified into something darker. I missed his children growing up. He missed mine. Our parents died during those years, and we stood at opposite ends of their funerals. The chasm between us wider than the graves we stood beside. All that time, I was carrying something toxic inside me. Every time I thought of Robert, my jaw would clench, my blood pressure would rise, and that knot in my stomach would tighten. I didn't realize that my resentment wasn't hurting him, it was hurting me. The research is unequivocal on this point. Chronic anger and hostility significantly increase your risk of heart disease, stroke, and immune system problems. But the studies don't capture the deeper cost, the moments lost, the joy diminished, the peace forfeited. I was 73 when I finally reached out to Robert. I'd had another health scare, nothing as serious as the heart attack, but enough to remind me that our time isn't infinite. I called him on his birthday, my hand trembling as I dialed a number I'd had to track down through his son. "It's been too long," I said when he answered, my voice cracking, "and that's my fault." There was a long silence, and I thought he might hang up. Then I heard a sound that broke and healed my heart simultaneously: my brother, crying quietly. On the other end of the line, "I've missed you, James," he said finally. "I've missed you every day." We met the following week at a small diner halfway between our homes. We were 2 old men by then, our hair white, our movements slower. But when we embraced in the parking lot, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't even realized I'd been carrying. Robert died 3 years later, instead of 17 years of silence. We could have had 20 years of brotherhood. That's a math that haunts me still. What I know now is that forgiveness isn't a gift you give someone else. It's a gift you give yourself. Carrying anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. It doesn't work that way. They go about their lives while you suffer the consequences. Is there someone you need to forgive? Someone you need to ask forgiveness from? Don't wait. That conversation might be uncomfortable for an hour, but the liberation lasts forever, and the years it might add to your life, those are precious beyond measure. The fourth mistake that robs people of vital years is something we rarely talk about openly, but it's destroying lives in slow motion, failing to find purpose beyond your primary career or role. For decades, I defined myself entirely as a lawyer and provider for my family. My business card might as well have been tattooed on my forehead. It was my entire identity. So when retirement loomed, I wasn't just facing the end of a job. I was facing an existential crisis. This happens to so many of us. The executive who loses her sense of worth when she turns in her company badge. The mother who feels adrift when her children leave home. The athlete who disappears from public consciousness when he can no longer compete. My neighbor Edward was a brilliant surgeon, gifted hands, saved countless lives. When arthritis forced him to retire at 68, he withered before our eyes. Within 2 years, this vibrant, intelligent man rarely left his house. Within 5, he was gone, not from any specific disease, but from what I can only describe as the disease of purposelessness. I was headed down the same path after my retirement party. For months, I wandered my house like a ghost, irritating Martha with my constant rearranging of the kitchen cabinets and obsessive lawn maintenance. I'd achieved everything I'd set out to achieve professionally, and now what? The turning point came when I reluctantly agreed to help a young attorney with a pro bono immigration case. Jessica was a fiery young lawyer with more passion than experience, and she needed someone who understood the complexities of the system. I agreed only because she was my niece's friend and I couldn't gracefully decline. What started as a favor became an awakening, working with families who had risked everything for a chance at safety and opportunity. It lit something in me that my corporate work never had. I wasn't just applying legal expertise. I was changing lives in tangible ways. That one case led to another, then another. Soon, I was volunteering 20 hours a week at a legal aid clinic, mentoring young attorneys and advocating for policy changes. I didn't need the money or the status. What I needed, what we all need, was the knowledge that my existence mattered, that I was contributing something meaningful to the world. Studies show that people with a strong sense of purpose live longer, have lower rates of heart disease and Alzheimer's, and recover more quickly from illness and surgery. It's not just about having something to do, it's about having something to live for. Your purpose doesn't have to be grandiose. It might be creating beautiful gardens that bring joy to your neighborhood. It might be mentoring one child who needs guidance. It might be using your hard-won wisdom to advocate for changes in your community. The size of the impact doesn't matter. What matters is that you know, bone deep, that your presence on this earth makes a positive difference. Find that thing, that contribution that only you, with your unique combination of experiences and skills, can make. It will add not just years to your life, but life to your years. The fifth and final mistake I see too many people make, one that insidiously drains life's quality and quantity, is allowing fear to make your world smaller and smaller as you age. After my heart attack, I was afraid of everything. Afraid to exercise in case I pushed too hard. Afraid to travel in case I had another episode far from my doctors. Afraid to try new things. Eat at new restaurants, meet new people. My fear was understandable, but it was also creating a cage around me that grew smaller every year. I see this pattern repeatedly as people age. The world becomes increasingly threatening, so they retreat to what feels safe and controllable. The new becomes frightening rather than invigorating. Risk becomes something to avoid at all costs rather than a necessary component of a full life. My sister-in-law, Catherine, after losing her husband to a sudden stroke, retreated into her routines like they were a fortress. Same grocery store on the same day each week. Same TV shows every evening. Same conversation topics whenever we visited. She was existing, not living, preserving herself like a specimen in formaldehyde. Contrast that with my friend Gloria, who lost her husband the same year, at 75. She signed up for drawing classes, something she'd always wanted to try but never had the courage for. At 77, she went to Italy alone, her first trip overseas. At 80, she started volunteering with refugee children, teaching them English through art. I could sit at home waiting to die, she told me over coffee last year, her eyes bright with the light of engagement, or I could live until I die. Seems like an easy choice when you put it that way, living until you die. That's the secret that too few discover in time. I'm not suggesting recklessness, I'm suggesting courage. The courage to keep expanding rather than contracting, to keep learning, growing, and experiencing. To accept that safety is ultimately an illusion, None of us makes it out of here alive, after all, and that a life without appropriate risk is merely existing. 2 years after my heart attack, I went skydiving with my grandson Jason on his 18th birthday. Martha thought I'd lost my mind. My cardiologist made me take additional tests before reluctantly clearing me, but I needed to know that fear wouldn't define my remaining years. The moment the plane door opened and the roar of the wind hit me, I was terrified. But when we jumped and that initial terror gave way to exhilaration, I understood something profound. I was more afraid of reaching the end of my life with regrets than I was of any physical risk. Since then, I've made it a point to do something that scares me at least once a month. Sometimes it's as dramatic as trying extreme sports with medical clearance. I'm not completely reckless. More often, it's emotional courage, having difficult conversations I'd previously avoided, expressing feelings I'd kept hidden, allowing myself to be vulnerable in new relationships. The research confirms what I've experienced. Novelty and challenge keep our brains healthy as we age. Learning new skills creates new neural pathways. Stepping outside comfort zones improves cognitive flexibility. The very things that fear tells us to avoid are often the things that keep us vibrant and alive. So ask yourself, where are you allowing fear to make your world smaller? What experiences are you denying yourself? What growth are you avoiding? The answer to those questions might just show you where your additional years, and more importantly, your joy is hiding. As I look back now from the vantage point of 86 years, I can trace the trajectory of my life like following a river. On a map, I can see where it flowed strong and true and where it almost dried up completely. I can see the dams I built myself and the moments when I finally had the wisdom to tear them down. 5 mistakes, 5 opportunities to choose differently, putting work above connection, ignoring your body's whispers until they become screams, nursing resentment instead of practicing forgiveness, failing to develop purpose beyond your primary career, allowing fear to shrink your world as you age. I made every one of these mistakes, and they nearly cost me everything. The heart attack at 58 wasn't the worst thing that happened to me. It was the best, because it woke me up while I still had time to change. Not everyone gets that second chance. My brother Robert didn't. My friend James didn't. My colleague Edward didn't. But you, listening to me right now, you still have time, whether you're 20 or 70. Tomorrow morning represents a new opportunity to live differently. Call the person you need to forgive. Schedule the medical checkup you've been postponing. Block time in your calendar for the people who matter most. Explore what gives your life meaning beyond your job title. Take one small step outside your comfort zone. These aren't just strategies for living longer. Though the science clearly shows they work, they're strategies for living better, for ensuring that the time you have, whether it's 5 more years or 50, is rich with meaning, connection, and joy. I know this because I've lived both ways. The way that leads to a hospital bed at 58, wondering if you've wasted your precious decades, and the way that leads to 86, looking back with gratitude rather than regret. The choice, as my doctor told me all those years ago, is entirely up to you now. I hope you choose wisely. Choose wisely. I hope when you reach my age, you can look back and say, I made mistakes, but I learned from them. I didn't just exist, I truly lived. That's all any of us can hope for in the end. And trust me, from someone who's much closer to that end than you are, it's more than enough. If this conversation has touched something in you today, if you recognize yourself in any of the mistakes I've shared, then my purpose in speaking with you has been fulfilled. Go forward and live. Truly, live while you still have the magnificent chance to do so.